This week, we are looking at the design of the library system. So what is design? What is involved in the design phase of the system development life cycle? So we start with the class structure produced in the analysis stage. We came up with a conceptual class diagram. We have the use cases. And our goal is to come up with a design that allows us to implement a system that behaves in the manner expected, that is specified by the use case model. So we decide on a number of issues in the design stage. What platform are we going to use? What operating system, what hardware, all those decisions are made. What language or languages are we going to use for implementation? What kind of a user interface do we have? Is it going to be graphical user interface? Is it a web-based interface? Is it a command line interface? All those issues. A chief major thing here in the object-oriented design would be the classes and interfaces and their details. How do you provide for long-term storage of data? How do you handle failures? And what kind of a system is this? Is it centralized or is it distributed? And how do you provide protection for the data and software and the computer system, all those issues. So you can see that there are numerous issues that we need to tackle. But of course, we are studying all this in the context of a class project. So several of these things will not be relevant to us. For example, we don't really care about the platform. The reason being, we are going to use the Java programming language. So we have decided on the language, and Java works on a number of platforms. So it is fairly platform independent, we could say. The user interface, we will assume is going to be a command line interface. We don't want to undertake the added complexity of creating a graphical user interface. Our chief focus in the design would be the design of the classes and interfaces. That is our major focus. We will provide for long-term storage using serialization, but you should be aware that serialization is not something that we want to use in a huge database. In fact, most or many commercial applications would use a relational database, and there will be some mapping between the object-oriented design that specifies the classes and interfaces and the long-term storage, which is a relational database. So we are not going to undertake that kind of a study at all. And you should also be aware that serialization has been deprecated by Java. So we are using it only for the purpose of helping us test and give some sense of storage, nothing more. We will not worry about failures at all. It is actually a topic for databases. And we will assume that it is a centralized system. And one thing I wanted to emphasize is that the system that we come up with can be easily hosted on a web server. I did that a few years ago. I was able to put it on the department server and access it on the internet, have a web-based interface for the library system. So it was not very difficult at all. So, but we are not going to undertake that. We will assume that it is a centralized system. And we will not worry about the protection aspect. Many of these issues that we are not tackling here are covered in other classes like database systems and computer security and parallel distributed systems and all that. So we are not going to worry about most of these things except classes and interfaces and to some extent long-term storage. But that is a very limited focus on long-term storage. What we are doing is not what is done in practice. One major design strategy that we have in this design is to separate the user interface and the business logic. The reason is this business logic is the logic related to the actual functioning of the library, the member classes or the book classes, the way you store the fact that a member has checked out a book, for example, or that a member has placed a hold, or the functionality for printing out transactions. Those kinds of things are in the business logic. The user interface is obviously the mechanism by which users interact with the system. And that could possibly be changed from a command line interface to a graphical user interface, but we don't have to change the business logic. So we separate the two. There will be no user interaction at all in the business logic, and there will be no business logic put in the user interface. So they are completely separated. So the business logic is more cohesive. The user interface is going to be more cohesive. There will be some coupling between the two. The user interface is obviously dependent on the business logic that we cannot avoid. The major activities, as we said, is to come up with a set of classes and assign the responsibility to the classes and determine the necessary data structures and methods. So what are the methods that we put into classes? What fields do we need? What are the constructors? How do these classes interact? And in a typical object-oriented design and development setup, this will be iterative. That is, you will not usually design the whole thing. Instead, you will be designing and developing a fairly small part of the system and then keep on enhancing the functionality. But that is not how we present our design. We have a fairly small system, and there is not much scope for presenting it in an iterative manner, although that is how we actually developed the system when we wrote the book, but that is not how we are going to present these in this slides and videos.